Good afternoon, and welcome to Supply Chain Now Radio. We are broadcasting live today from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia. My name is Scott Luton. I'm your host for today's session. In our webinar today, we'll be focusing on a key skill set for any leader, the art and science of negotiation. Our speaker, Mark Bilgin, author of Mastering High-Stakes Negotiations, will offer his expertise and best practices for improving your negotiation skills, both on the buy and the sell side. More about Mark in just a moment. But as always, we're glad to have you with us here today on Supply Chain Now Radio. All right, so let's tackle our ground rules first. All attendees will be on mute as we're looking to optimize the audio experience. Now, with that said, let's make it as interactive as possible. So please do submit your questions via the chat toolbar. We'll answer as many as we have time for at the conclusion of today's webinar. And finally, a PDF of today's presentation and the recording will be sent out in the next few days to each of our registrants. So let's take a minute to recognize our sponsors here on Supply Chain Now Radio. Big thanks to our sponsor, APICS Atlanta, which has been serving the Metro Atlanta community since 1964. For those of you new to APICS, it is the premier industry association dedicated to end-to-end supply chain management. Around the world, our organization serves over 45,000 members. APICS offers membership and professional development, a wide range of education opportunities, industry-leading research and publications, and widely recognized professional certifications. To learn more, visit us at apicsatlanta.org. Special thanks to our sponsor, TalentStream, a WeBank-certified recruiting and staffing firm that specializes in helping organizations find top talent in the engineering, the manufacturing, and the supply chain space. Did you know TalentStream has averaged a 45-day time to fill on its core job searches in 2018? Contact them today to put that V8 search engine to work for your organization. To learn more, visit us at talentstreamstaffing.com. So let's share a little more information about our speaker today. Mark Bilgin is a seasoned sales and procurement professional. He is also author of Mastering High-Stakes Negotiations, which was published in 2017. Mark brings more than 20 years of experience to the table in oil and gas, power generation, and commercial and military aircraft engine industries. He has personally negotiated over a whopping $2.5 billion in large equipment deals. Mark is a dynamic speaker who specializes in contract negotiations, strategic sourcing to include category strategy and execution, spend analytics, market intelligence analysis, and supplier relationship management. A graduate of Carnegie Mellon Tepper School of Business and the University of Washington, go Huskies, Mark lives in Columbus, Ohio with his wife and daughter. With all that being said, please join me in welcoming today Mr. Mark Bilgin.
Scott, thank you for having me today.
Well, okay, our audience is in for a treat. We appreciate your time, Mark.
Oh, no worries, Scott. Thank you. Okay, so I guess let me also welcome everyone to join us today. Hopefully, we'll have a good discussion and engagement today, in this topics around negotiations. Let me go through the agenda just briefly, topics that I would like to touch on. Basically, just a quick definition of negotiation, I think, is always a good way to start the conversations. We're talking about negotiation, so why not give a good definition that around that to kind of baseline ourselves, and then I'll go into the these fundamentals, and I carefully kind of worded as success ensuring philosophies. You can certainly call them practices as well, that will certainly boost, in my opinion, the overall end results of what you're doing with regards to negotiation, whether it's selling, or buying. And then, of course, I'll try to finish it up with a simple kind of key takeaways to kind of, bring the thoughts together. Before I go into these philosophies, just a couple of things that I thought I would mention. I currently have 9 here that I will go through, and I won't go through these things. They're not laid out from, a particular order from low importance, high importance. These are really to me, the fundamentals that, kind of is there. It's certainly supporting success. They are interrelated with each other. They do communicate with each other, kind of strengthen each other as well. You know, I have 9. You might have others having less or more or slightly different combinations of various things. But for me, you know, as a negotiator, these are kind of the fundamental things that I kind of lay out, you know, the type of negotiations I do, you know, in my current role here. And by sharing with you these things, I'm certainly hoping that it will either refresh maybe some of the philosophies and practices you have, or it might, you know, impose some new ones that you are, you know, that you might incorporate again towards increasing the probabilities of success. Okay, so with that, let me go to the definition here. What is negotiation? You know, as I was writing my book, I was reading a lot of different books. I generally read a lot of books, and one of my content editors actually recommended me a nice book from Tony English. I have the reference on the bottom there, and a very interesting book about negotiations. And in that book, you know, Tony has done an awesome, in my opinion, review of negotiation definitions. And he ended up with his own definition. So I'm referring exactly to Tony's definition as to what negotiation is. The way he describes it, and I think it's the most kind of simplistic and realistic way of describing really what negotiation is. So this is how he describes it. Consultation between 2 or more parties that involve the management of tension. So I kind of underlined that because ultimately, in my opinion, that's what happens. You know, you manage the tensions in the engagement associated with attempts to seek an agreement. You know, to me, it's a very, very nice, good, realistic, elegant definition. Ultimately, you know, the idea is whether you're on the selling side, buying side, you're trying to get into an agreement. Obviously, if you're engaging together, there's a lot of tensions going on, you know, in the engagement for various reasons, and it's all about managing these things or having the right tools and philosophies to approach, you know, into managing these tensions. So that's, to me, is a very good definition, and that's what I will be talking about today. Again, I will hit on the selling kind of dynamics and buying dynamics as well, so that we can cover the both ends. Okay, so the first philosophy that I want to talk about is trust and respect. You know, this to me is certainly extremely important in the engagement to, you know, work extra hard to develop, you know, the trust and respect, you know, dynamic, whether you're on the selling side or the buying side. Because ultimately, in my opinion, when you get together to negotiate, whether you're buying something or selling, you know, you want to kind of plan on not only just leaving the engagement and, you know, parties going their way, but, you know, leaving the engagement with a kind of relationships and a communication even stronger than what you started, so that ultimately whatever agreement you actually end up with would be a long-lasting one. And there's, of course, a lot of things you have to do to do that before the engagement. But one thing I do from a mechanical point of view is very similar actually to what kind of Scott has done, you know, in the beginning of this meeting. He kind of went through the ground rules, you know, of this engagement. So I specifically do that as well, you know, before the engagements. I have early in my career, I have, you know, went to engagements without covering the ground rules and quickly realized, you know, things tend to kind of potentially go in different ways. Setting the ground rules pretty much lays out the kind of the fundamental rules the engagement will take place, and tremendously helps, you know, how the communications flow. The 4 rules that I go through, and I specifically picked these rules. I specifically picked a low number as well. Again, there's reasons for that, because, for example, the higher the number, the more distracted folks get, and they kind of tend to not really kind of focus on it throughout the engagement. So the 4 simplistic, you know, kind of engagement rules that I go through is just before the engagement, as the engagement starts, is, you know, 1 person speaks at a time. Again, this is very carefully selected to eliminate, you know, pockets of discussions and conversations during the engagement. There's nothing, in my opinion, that can be more distracting than, as you're negotiating, having two people in the back of the room doing their little thing, and or talking to something maybe related, but not, at the right time, at the right place. So once one person speaks at a time. Show mutual respect is another important one that I specifically mentioned. And again, that's there to lay out the foundation that the communication will be respectful. Hopefully individuals will control themselves. It will be kind of a very professional kind of an engagement. I specifically mentioned that the expectation I have is a constructive and honest dialogue. Again, there's reasons why, I specifically mentioned that. To re-emphasize that if I'm, buying something, I expect, the seller to be honest with things and open with things right from the get-go. And the last one I specifically mentioned, of course, is, asking questions. Check your understanding by asking questions. Again, there's reason for that. It's basically because of the power of asking questions during negotiation engagement. So I specifically kind of prime the, the other side to take advantage of. These kind of ground rules. And I do follow these things, by the way, throughout the engagement, not only with my team, my side of the folks, but also, the other side as well. If I see significant violations, I do go and engage with the, with the individuals or with the dynamic to eliminate it. And again, this works towards trust and respect. Once you engage that, generally things flow relatively easily throughout the process. Okay? The second one is, fair and reasonable as opposed to my way or highway. So that's another very, very important kind of philosophy where, generally, this type of philosophy simply does not, my way or highway simply does not work. That's what I've observed. This does not mean one would not take a strong stance in various situations. There are some situations where, as the negotiator, you have to kind of strengthen your position, harden your position, and then soften it, depending on the ebbs and flows of the discussion of the communication. But at the end of the day, what matters is, approaching the various conditions, the situation, whether it's commercial, whether it's terms and conditions, with the idea of having a fair and reasonable approach. I think simplistic way I can describe it to you is, having this this approach of finding sensible solutions to impasses really is the way that I think that can be alleviated. So that is the approach that I would recommend, fair and reasonable, and at least as a starting point, that should be the base. And then depending on that, again, the negotiator can take different routes. But my way of highway does not work, unfortunately, especially if the intent is to have obviously a long-term relationship, long-term contract, a contract that will, survive many years of functions and hopefully will bring benefit both to, the buyers and sellers. Another important one is preparation. I think this is certainly, I think this notion is out there. It's mentioned in many different places, but it's in my opinion, it's absolute must. I certainly cannot guarantee that, you will be successful after all of the preparations you would do in a negotiation. But one thing I certainly can guarantee you is that you will find yourself in a concessionary position. You will find yourself in a surprise kind of a, position in the negotiations if you don't put adequate hours into the preparations. You have to give yourself and the team, again, enough time to get ready, to prep, for the negotiation, and make sure you vet different things and different dynamics and different positions. Another thing I want to mention here is, and there might be some philosophical discussions around this, is, if you're not ready, certainly take advantage of postponing the engagement would be my recommendation. Now, having said that, if you're on the selling side, you might find yourself disqualified potentially if you really push the engagement to the right. So that's really the disadvantage if you're on the selling side. Obviously, on the buying side, you have a little bit of advantage over controlling the dynamic. But at the end of the day, there are also some ways you can apply maybe delay strategies if you don't feel like yourself and your team or certain dynamics have not fully vetted. And especially, by the way, for international negotiations, there's also an international component that comes into play. So again, you have to make sure that you're ready for it. You have to prepare to a point where material pretty much cold, and you're ready, to go wherever the dynamic will take you. You got to have that kind of understanding, and generally you'll have that, with experience. Obviously, with experience you will come to a point naturally. You will know that you're ready, and you will know that you can start the engagement and see what happens at that point. And I left with a nice quote from Abraham Lincoln that I think represent very nicely this particular philosophy. Okay, another important one is, of course, integrity and professionalism. Author Burt Baggett defines integrity verbatim as, doing what you said you would do when you said you would do it and how you said you would do it. I mean, it's as simple as that. This is, in my opinion, valid for negotiations as well. You have to go there. You have to have strong integrity and professionalism, and show it, when it's needed. Perfect example, I have been in negotiations where, I've realized the other side giving away something that they were maybe not supposed to, or they were giving away by complete mistake. For these situations, I strongly recommend voicing that and helping the other side, not just sitting there, secretly, kind of waiting for the other side to kind of, crater or make the mistake and leave the meeting kind of cheering, but standing up and saying, look, are you sure what you're doing is right? You might want to check this again. Again, this is going into building that strong relationship during the negotiations, so that, you leave, you build up these strong, hopefully commercially beneficial, contracts. Jeffrey Curry, for example, said it very nicely in his book, A Short Course in International Negotiations, which is going to the heart of this. Concessions must be extracted from adversaries, but they are given by friends. Okay, so your philosophy here should be to develop that friendship and get the concessions based on that, not based on stronger tactics, stronger positions, but building that strong, close relationships. Okay, here's another important one. Lesson learning from victories and defeats. This to me is very important in order to continuously improve yourself, your team, throughout the process. So you should have a kind of a win and loss philosophy or study after each engagement to kind of understand what worked, what didn't work, what was the surprise, what kind of can be improved in different areas. You should also certainly, as part of this philosophy, manage the wins and loss with professionalism and grace. At the end of the day, negotiations can go both ways, and there might not be a winner from both parties. So, so you have to be ready for that. You have to be ready that, a certain loss can take place, and if it happens, what you need to do is analyze that rigorously and hopefully prevent that for future, engagements. Deborah Benton, for example, said it very nicely. She said, you'll learn more from one bad decision or a mistake than all the good ones you'll ever make. So, this is valid for negotiations as well. There might be some mistakes there, and you'll learn something, and you'll make adjustments, in future iterations. So this should be part of your kind of overall culture. Another important one is self-control. This is extremely important in negotiations. You should, of course, never lose control, in negotiations, because it will certainly play to the hand of the other side, and it will backfire, and it will basically, it should be avoided at all costs. Now, saying this easy, of course, practicing is the challenging one, because at the end of the day, negotiations are human beings as well, and there's a lot of, there's a kind of a DNA for each negotiator based on their backgrounds and cultural differences and so forth. So there might be challenges, for certain individuals to have this control. But this should be certainly part of the kind of core philosophy for a master negotiator, to be able to do that. I certainly see myself kind of potentially losing control in certain situations as well. And when I see that, or someone in my team, for example, or someone on the other side as well, by the way, it doesn't have to be yourself. So what I would recommend for those, again, just taking a break, recommending a break at that point in time to cool things off, huddle again and have some engagements either internally or even with yourself, kind of, and then re-engage again. So you do have that capability to take a break as opposed to, letting things go. But fundamentally, yes, what I strongly would recommend is making sure that you have your self-control, throughout the entire engagement. This one is a very interesting philosophy. Bad news early is good news. Bosworth and Holland actually had this concept in their customer-centric selling book. They had a very nice book on that one where they're talking about this philosophy in selling. Bad news early being good news in selling, and I strongly support that. The same thing is valid for negotiations as well. Okay, you should welcome bad news early because, at a minimum, from the selling side, but also from the buying side, because you will have more time to fix things. You might have some things you can apply, to fix things before, the engagement is done, decision is made. So you should welcome that. You should certainly, throughout the engagement, test and understand whether there are some bad news areas that are brewing. And if you hear those, if you see those, I strongly recommend understanding those early on, not ignoring those, hoping and they will go away, but more understanding these dynamics and trying to address them, early on. Again, this is going into the, the time scale in the negotiations. Catching these things early simply gives you more, time to address these things, whether via internal action items, communication, strategic moves, and those kind of things. You will have more time to address those. At the end of the day, once the engagement is done, the PO is issued or the contract is signed, at that point it's done. It doesn't, having the bad news is not going to be helping you too much at that point in time. So address them early on, and I think you should welcome them as early as you can. This one, I think, is a very, general maxim, the old maxim, too many cooks will spoil the broth. I certainly have seen this and strongly advertise this. In negotiations, you are going to have probably a lot of cooks that will be running around trying to do their things, and they will spoil the broth, if the lead negotiator does not control those. So ultimately, you can have as many cooks as you want, but you need to have a master chef, that these cooks get their directions to prepare the final meal. Okay, that's really the message I will pass on this. Controlling, the team interactions and dynamics is extremely important. And of course, hence, the reason for preparing for negotiations, preparing carefully, kind of sensing how many cooks you will have in the kitchen as well early on, and kind of engaging with those in various different ways before the engagement start is very important. Again, if you don't control this, it will go out of hand, and it will certainly derail various things. It will be difficult. It will make it difficult, at least for one side, maybe in both sides, to control the dynamic and potentially result in, unpleasant, undesirable, let's say, kind of positions, whether it's contractual, whether it's selling or buying. This is certainly something important that I think the negotiation leaders should focus on controlling. And the last one I have is a good one that, you know, I quickly have seen, and the importance of it, and was also, I have to admit, you know, was embedded to me, you know, by my own mentors, and that is dressing the part. You know, it's maybe a simplistic concept, but very, very important in negotiations. It's important generally for two reasons. You know, one is, you know, it sends a visual kind of message and signal to the other side, you know, from a professional respect point of view. It also, you know, enhances the kind of the pressure on the other side to come into the engagement and taking it seriously. So you're kind of really raising the stake a little bit right from the get-go from a visual point of view by dressing adequately. You know, and let me expand that a little bit. You know, when I say dress, of course, I talk about literally, you know, having a very professional kind of way of coming into the engagement, and not just, you know, t-shirts and shorts and slacks and those kind of things, which I think is obvious clearly. But on the same token, I also mean kind of preparing yourself, or at least, you know, making part of your preparation some of the, you know, some of the lingo, you know, around some of the language, some of the acronyms around what you're negotiating. You know, I also include that in this particular family, you know, because there are, you know, there are some studies out there that emphasizes using the same lingo, same kind of language, resulting in much more beneficial, you know, contracts, beneficial agreements. So it helps tremendously, and so as part of this, one should also focus on, you know, understanding the language. Now, contractual language, I think that should be by default there if you're negotiating contracts, you know, terms and conditions and those kind of things. But if you are, for example, you know, new at a particular industry and you're, you know, now find yourself negotiating in that area, you should spend some time to understand the acronyms, the certain terms that are used. It is powerful to, you know, use terms with the other side and have a kind of a understanding, a quick understanding, a quick kind of finding yourself speaking the same language, helping, again, finding resolutions. So, so ultimately, though, again, this is an important part of, you know, the negotiation philosophy. So with that, that was pretty much all the 9. So let me move gradually the key takeaways. If you want to be a successful negotiator, you must focus on, you know, adopting a series of success ensuring philosophies. And again, I'm picking my words carefully here. Success ensuring doesn't mean success guaranteeing. You know, you still have to do the basic work. You still have to do, you know, the fundamentals. You still have to have the background and the knowledge and so forth. But these philosophies will increase your chances to have ultimate success and more solid contracts, good commercial benefits and resolutions. And with the same token, you should also purposely stay away, reject failure-inducing philosophies. I mean, obviously, the reverse of what I mentioned, the 9 items, the reverse of these 9 certainly can be taken as, you know, failure-inducing philosophies. But let me give you an example, I guess, while I'm on this slide. You might have all of these 9 philosophies, you know, to help you with success, and you made your preparations. All you have to do is, you know, include maybe one, in my opinion, a failure-inducing philosophy. Let's say that philosophy is, you know, winning the negotiation, but not just winning, destroying the other side as well. Okay, not just winning, but winning by destruction. You know, that kind of philosophy, unfortunately, in my opinion, will neutralize everything else. Okay, that kind of philosophy, unfortunately, you know, very often will not result in healthy contracts. It will result in contracts and very often it will not result in anything, by the way, if that's really the philosophy, but it will result in contracts that are very short-lived, you know, contracts or dynamics where one side or both sides would want to get out of it immediately. So again, you know, all it takes is one failure-inducing philosophy to come in and to neutralize everything, and hence the reason for the second bullet point. You know, you should consciously, continuously make an effort to reject these philosophies so that they don't come back and neutralize everything and all the effort that you have put together at the end of the day. But that's really pretty much the key takeaways that I have for this. And that's pretty much it, the material, Scott. With that, I'm pretty much set.
Terrific. Well, we're going to enter into the Q&A portion of today's webinar. Mark, before we do that, do you want to invite our audience to offer some feedback on your presentation?
Yes, Scott. Yes. Thank you for that, Scott. So two things. If you would like to get in touch with me, either with today's material or any other types of questions, the two places you can do that is my author's homepage, www.markbilgin.com. On the bottom of it, there's a nice communications block, and or LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out to me, not only today's topics, but anything around negotiation. I mean, this is a topic certainly I'm very passionate about, and I will be more than happy to communicate on various things. The second one is even better, I think. I am very interested about your comments about today's webinar. You know, things that you liked, things that you would like to see more or less, or things that you would like to change. And certainly, you know, I'm interested. I want to get a gauge of maybe what other really hot topics are out there around negotiation, because I can go around this topic for hours on various areas, but I'm interested to see what else you think is worthwhile, you know, to discuss. So if you can provide me those two things by 6 p.m. Monday of next week, I will certainly be happy to pull a random name out of it and send a free copy of my book.
Terrific. What a great deal. We appreciate that, Mark, and so to our audience, please take advantage of that. Beyond the opportunity to get a copy of a great book for free, you also will provide some feedback that will be helpful, not just to Mark, but to all of us. Okay, so I've got 12:31 Eastern Daylight Time. We're going to take probably the next 20 minutes or so to pose some questions to Mark. To our audience, this is your opportunity to ask a true negotiation and expert and business leader questions on how to get what you want, basically. So we've got a couple questions already submitted, Mark. Before I get to those questions, I want to ask you a question.
Yes, Scott.
Do you have a favorite question or a couple of questions that you keep in your hip pocket as you enter into any negotiation conversation, those that are some of your favorites?
Yes, the answer is yes. And let me answer you this way, Scott. I mean, the kind of negotiations I have is, you know, tends to be rather complex. So I don't have what do you call a kind of a default question, but what I do have, and what I would recommend as well, is as part of the preparation process, of course, to kind of lay out, you know, a series of questions that you would want to ask at the right place at the right time, you know, when certain things are being discussed. But I mean, just to give you an answer, if it's going to be like a default question, you know, on the commercial areas, of course, anytime, you know, a price is being discussed, certainly I will have questions where I will kind of poke around, you know, cost structure and where certain costs are coming in, to kind of get a feel for, you know, how the price is put together, you know, by the supplier, for example. Anytime we're talking about, for example, deliveries, you know, I will poke around, you know, factory loading capabilities and so forth, trying to understand, you know, how well supported, you know, for example, the delivery position is for the supplier. So yeah, so I would have those things kind of by default, but in my case, they tend to go more specific. So in other words, I will know what questions I will ask at certain places, and then of course I will ask those things, you know, at that point. And And one thing to add to that as well, Scott, and I've seen this. I mean, I've seen like a script being written and where you go through one question after the other. You know, it's good. Do not get me wrong. Those are good things. But what I will recommend is going back to, again, the preparation. You know, prepare yourself to the point where you know everything cold. You don't even have to look at a script. You know where to ask what question. And that way, you know, you ask the question at the right place at the right time. You don't have to worry about notes and things of that nature is what I would recommend. And that generally comes with, of course, two things. One, experience, number one. And the other one, of course, is, you know, how well you know the material that you are, you know, the topic that you're negotiating around. The more comfy you are about the material, the much easier to kind of really not even take notes anymore, but know what to ask when. So that's how that comes together. And of course, that takes a little bit of time. But once you're there, it comes naturally, Scott. You know, those questions kind of pop up naturally.
Terrific. Appreciate your insight there. Okay, so our first audience question comes from Href. He asks, how would you recommend I get an understanding of product before negotiating?
Okay, Ashraf, a good question. So let me try to, you know, answer this way here. I mean, several ways. You know, it actually depends on whether, you know, you are already familiar with the product or not. And I think the premise of your question is probably you're not. Okay, so if that's the case, I mean, you know, you have to do a little bit of homework. You know, go out there and certainly take advantage of what's out there publicly available on the internet to kind of educate yourself. You know, on and we talked about product now, so let's talk about product. You know, certainly internet, certainly. You know, other individuals maybe that are functioning in that particular industry. If you know these individuals, it's, again, not always easy to pick up the phone and call someone and talk about a particular, you know, product or industry and so forth. You can always go to consulting companies as well, by the way, you know, and I have certainly used that as well, you know, to kind of boost up the knowledge base a little bit. The same thing can be also said, by the way, Ashraf, for international negotiations. You know, trying to get a feel for, you know, the country you're negotiating at. You know, there's some books in that topic as well, which I listed in my book as well. But, you know, there are consultants out there that you can also call and talk to get a feel for how things are done in a particular country from a negotiations point of view. But again, if you're talking about pure product, you know, the sources I would recommend is, and by the way, if you are a negotiator that sells that product for a company that sells that product, obviously, I mean, the first thing I would do is call the salesperson, the engineer, you know, whoever is selling that stuff, and sit down and kind of educate myself on the products itself. So again, there's many ways you can do that. And you just have to explore all the avenues, you know, as part of your preparation process, so that by the time you sit down, obviously in an optimal world, you would be as comfortable as the other side selling that stuff. But you know, anything you can do to make yourself comfortable, you know, at a minimum from the language point of view, the lingo point of view, the nomenclature and things of that nature, first of all, it will be an advantage to you, but it will also help you connect, you know, with the other side, you know, on the same language basis, and it should hopefully ultimately help you.
Great question. Appreciate your response there, Mark. Next question, a couple questions here from Dennis. His first question may be one that you want to take offline here, Mark, and feel free to do that. But Dennis asks, how do you calculate your value as a negotiator in terms of your professional fees?
Okay, yeah, okay. Yes, no, thank you for that. And yes, that might be you know, a side conversation as well. So Dennis, feel free to reach out to me, you know, via those two sources, you know, for more detail, you know, answer. But okay, so I'll answer that in two ways. First of all, it depends on whether, you know, you're negotiating as part of a corporate, you know, entity or individually. Corporate entities, I mean, you know, as part of the supply chain, there are some basic techniques and methods that, you know, you apply to kind of determine, the value you bring in at the end of the negotiations. In the supply chain, obviously, very often it's just simply how much savings, you brought in, for example, or there's some other things you can always, use, but I'm going by the simplistic one. The other one is if you're an independent entity doing this independently, that's possible as well. Again, there might be different philosophies for that. I've seen one philosophy where, it's a fixed fee no matter what, no matter what the size is or how long, for example, the engagement is, it's a fixed number. I have certainly have seen that and heard that. There might be some other things that you can come up with tied to, for example, a percentage over the savings that you have achieved. There's also those philosophies. If you come in and that you're there to, for example, achieve certain dollar savings, you can tie that into, again, a fee position and say, well, if I save you this much, I'll get a certain percentage of that savings as another, method. But again, I mean, this is going into almost a bit of a pure mechanical mathematics at this point. But, hopefully these couple of ideas will be helpful to you.
Great. Appreciate that, Mark. And Dennis asked an interesting second question here. How much over budget is ethical as a supplier while negotiating for your services?
So I got to think through this question a little bit. I'm not sure. So, Scott, can you repeat that question again? I'm not sure if I get that question exactly.
Yep. And Dennis, feel free to elaborate with another chat message here. But Dennis asked, how much over budget is ethical as a supplier while negotiating for your services?
Okay. Okay. That's a good question. I think the question is pretty much, I mean, the way I read this question, and again, Dennis, feel free to reach out to me as well, to clarify it further, but it's almost like you're asking, what margin is ethical, kind of a thing. And, my answer to that is, that's a good question. I think, when it comes to margin, and let's pick any supplier at this point in time. Let's talk about margin, okay? I mean, margin is margin. If you go overboard with margin, you won't sell anything. It's that simple. The market will push you out. You will be done. No one will buy your stuff. So it's pretty much market driven. I'm having difficulty seeing the ethical components in this. I mean, you should be ethical no matter what you do, by the way, period. That's really the bottom line. So let me make sure that that's clearly stated. But when it comes to margin, really the market will, correct itself. If you go grossly above margin, then you will see a market correction, and that should pretty much answer the question at that point.
Yep, great response, and Dennis did confirm that's what he was asking about. So,
okay, thank you for that.
Yeah,
okay.
Great insight there, Mark. Next question comes again from Ashraf. He asked, how do you judge the product value when you are negotiating to buy?
Okay, yes. You judge the product value obviously by making a detailed assessment, a detailed market analysis as to simplistically who else is offering that product. Hopefully it's not a product that's one-off, and even then, there might be some techniques to apply. But I mean, simplistically, if you're buying a product that other people are producing, and obviously, they might not produce the same product, they might not produce the same quality, they might not have the same brand and so forth, but that's where the market analysis, supplier analysis, come into the equation to do that comparison and get a good feel for that. And obviously, this is very important, Ashraf. I think you're going, around maybe a kind of a buyer's position as to buying something as opposed to sellers. But yeah, for those kind of things, again, it's part of your preparation. You have to do a market analysis. You have to do a full-blown supplier analysis. to get an understanding of, again, who else is selling that stuff, how much are they selling for. You have to do some sort of a normalization as well, keep in mind, so that you can compare apples to apples. But at the end of the day, when you do such a normalization, you should get a good feel for, what that product is worth that you are negotiating, and how much others folks are, selling it as well. Let's say you don't know that stuff, for example. So let's think about that as well. Let's say you don't know that stuff and it's a one-off product. Well, if you're negotiating with multiple suppliers, again, you can now compare the value that they're offering. You still have to normalize it to make sure that it's apples to apples, and then look at them in relative terms, to determine which one, relatively is more expensive than the others. So that's really generally how you do those things, and you must do those things, so that at a minimum, from a price point of view, you are, you're comfortable with how much you're paying for the product, and or determine your negotiations accordingly.
Great question, great answer. Appreciate that, Mark. Next comment and question comes from Amanda, and Amanda states, Mark, I've read Mastering High Stakes Negotiations, really enjoyed the book. Leaders are readers. What books would you recommend to supply chain professionals?
Okay, and hopefully maybe in and around the negotiations, because there's, of course, huge amount of topics out there. As far as if I just keep it purely in and around negotiations, certainly there are some fundamental books that I certainly can recommend. Obviously, the William Urey's book is to me is fundamental. I have given some examples in my presentation to various writers. Certainly, Jeffrey Curry's book I would strongly recommend. A Short Course in International Negotiating. I think it has some very solid recommendations in there. Again, talking about, the topic of negotiations, and certainly Michael Wheeler's The Art of Negotiation. To me, if I have to give you, 3 books at this point, those would be the one. In my book, I peppered references as well as I was talking about different topics. So certainly those books, would be ones that I would recommend as well. And if you want a little bit more, some additional lists, feel free to reach out to me, and I can maybe add a few more that, again, I read and I thought was extremely beneficial in the topics of negotiations.
Terrific. Great question, Amanda. Hope that helps. Appreciate that insight, Mark. So Dennis, Dennis is getting a free interview here, Mark. He's got another great question here.
Awesome here. He has all the questions.
Dennis is asking, Mark, can you give us an example of a failure that you've encountered that you'd say taught you your best lessons?
Oh, Dennis went to the jugular question here. Okay. Yes. I'm going to pull something, in the short amount of time we have here. In the world of selling, and I've been in that world, we talked about a $2 billion size there. Obviously, not the entire $2 billion was the wins that I had. I had losses there as well in projects that I negotiated. We lost, for various reasons. But generally, again, coming back to the win-loss analysis, when you have a loss, you have to do that win-loss analysis to learn a lesson out of what happened and what can you do to get better and so forth. Generally, in the losses that I have, it came to, certain number of things, and I'll give you some flavors of that. It was certainly either price. I think that's pretty obvious. Simply the price was not there. With regards to the competition, and it just did not work. The CapEx position that I offered was not beneficial, and the buyer decided to go with the competition or someone else. Very often it's deliveries. You don't offer good deliveries, and therefore you simply do not win the offer, or you don't offer the right type of delivery, and it doesn't work. Now just coming to me, for example, in one of my projects, It was a project that was in South America in a very remote location that could only be accessed, by the river systems that were getting flooded in a particular time of the year to allow the barges to go and bring the equipment to the site. So, okay, well, to meet that requirement, for example, the delivery had to be in a specific time of the year to kind of meet that requirement. And we simply did not meet that requirement, and it was pretty much given that we will lose that project. So there is an example for you. But again, even for that case, what's the lesson learned? Well, the lesson learned is, go back and improve the deliveries, look at other ways to deliver the equipment, or in some cases simply say this is one-off. Let's not change anything because of this very specific case. It is what it is, you just basically get a lesson out of it and move on, kind of a thing, right? So again, there's different flavors in there, but generally these would be the reasons. I mean, there's other reasons as well. There might be terms and conditions, heads up. It might be liquidated damages, it can be all kinds of guarantees, those kind of things. So it can be a variety of things, but whatever it is, the message I can pass on to you is do the win-loss analysis, get a lesson out of it, and try to incorporate and improve it in future iterations.
Terrific. Great questions, Dennis and Mark. Thanks for answering some tough questions here today. And in general, thanks for joining us. So to our audience, again, want to keep that feedback opportunity in front of mind here. Mark is offering to draw randomly from all the comments and feedback he gets to send out a free copy of a great book, Mastering High Stakes Negotiations, from a professional that's negotiated over $2.5 billion of contracts. Is that right, Mark?
Yes, that's correct.
Wow. Okay. Well, we're going to wrap up today's webinar on a few final items here. Again, to the audience, if you've got additional questions, please reach out to Mark. Check out his website, markbilgin.com. Reach out to him on LinkedIn. Mark strikes me as someone that enjoys comparing notes. Great resource to have in your network. So first off, Supply Chain Now Radio has recently rolled out a text to subscribe feature for our webinar programming. So if you're a regular attendee for our webinars, no need to continue to register on a one-off basis for our program. So to be auto-enrolled for each of our webinars, text your email to 42828 and we'll take it from there. So this might help make your life even easier, especially if you're always needing certification maintenance points. So we'll try to help make your life as easy as possible. Secondly, I want to wrap up on a couple of next steps here. We invite our audience to join us for one of our upcoming webinars, or for that matter, all of our upcoming webinars. We've got several intriguing sessions, much like today, on the docket in the next few months, focused on topics such as logistics labor market update. We all know we're in a real tight labor market. We're going to get an update from a company that has surveyed over 15,000 logistics employees to really share the pulse of what's going through their minds. We're going to tackle artificial intelligence in supply chain and answer the question, is manufacturing ready for AI in supply chain? We'll tackle supply chain transformation. We just finalized a webinar earlier today on successfully engaging millennials. But learn more about all these sessions at apicsatlanta.org. Thirdly, join us in Atlanta on October 19th and 20th for our APICS Regional Supply Chain Leadership Forum. That's a mouthful. Hosted by Georgia Tech. We're pleased to be featuring site tours, networking, and incredible professional development opportunities. Sponsorship opportunities are available. To learn more, send an email to info@apicsatlanta.org. Also, if you're interested in pursuing a supply chain management certification, be sure to check out our APICS Atlanta CSCP and CLTD boot camps at Georgia Tech, scheduled for December 2018. Finally, if I can serve as a resource for you or your organization in any way, please shoot me a note at evp@apicsatlanta.org. So, Mark, hey, before we conclude today's session, any final thoughts on your end?
Yes, Scott, a couple of things. Number one, first of all, thank you, Scott, for having me today. I really enjoyed at least our exchange and the questions, and be able to talk about, again, a topic that I certainly enjoy. The second thing, I wish everyone a nice weekend. It's a Friday, so hopefully you'll finish up the day nicely and enjoy the weekend. And I think a final thought is, I certainly enjoyed the negotiations. I hope you enjoy it as well. And as you're doing it, and hopefully you'll do this, for the sake of building stronger relationships, with your suppliers or with your customers. Ultimately, I think that's what matters. Using negotiations to build up stronger, solid relationships.
Time to go through some great Q&A. Big thanks to our sponsors again, APICS Atlanta and TalentStream. Of course, a big thank you to our audience for participating. On behalf of Supply Chain Now Radio, this is Scott Luton concluding today's episode. Have a wonderful week, and we hope to reconnect with you again real soon. Thanks, everyone.